The creation knows the voice of its maker. It knows the voice of its master, and it obeys immediately. So they go into the sea, or they cross the sea, this metaphorical picture of the rule of evil in this world, or the chaos of evil. So he says, when evening had come, he said to them, let us go across to the other side. And leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. Now that phrase, just as he was, maybe is a little bit confusing. Many people have kind of struggled with what does that mean, just as he was. It's the adverb as, put together with the verb eimi, which just means to be. It's in the imperfect tense, so literally, as he was. So they took him as he was. And literally, all that really means is that they took Jesus in the boat while he was still in the boat. Because remember, he's in the boat all day. So it means that Jesus didn't get out of the boat. He didn't come ashore, take a break, and come ashore, kind of stretch his legs. He was in the boat all day, staying in the boat. He says, let's go. They all get the other boats and they leave without Jesus leaving the boat and coming ashore. So just as he was, the other boats were with him. Now notice the connection there, the attachment. The other boats were not with his boat. The other boats were not with the sailors. The other boats were with him. So the attachment, the connection there is to him. They're connected to him. Jesus is the master. They are his sheep. They've heard his voice and they're attached to him. So the other boats were with him. Verse 37, and a great windstorm arose, and the waves were breaking into the boat. Breaking into the boat. Literally, they were crashing. The waves were literally throwing themselves against the boat. So this great windstorm arose. The word there, windstorm, is the same word for hurricane. It's the same word that the Septuagint will use to describe the whirlwind that God spoke to Job out of. And this word means not just a little storm, it means a hurricane force storm, a gale force storm. This great windstorm arose. Matthew uses the word seismos, which is the word that we get our word seismic from. You know, seismic has to do with the quaking, a shaking of the earth. So literally Matthew says that it was a sea quake, a shaking of the sea, a rattling of the sea. Mark calls it a great hurricane or a great windstorm arose. And the idea here is that it arose suddenly and it arose fiercely. So the Sea of Galilee is a place that is a very particularly dangerous body of water to be on at certain times. The storm that arises is a storm of great ferocity, a great fury, and also a great quickness that it comes about. We're told that the reason for this is just because of the geography of the Sea of Galilee. So the Sea of Galilee, as we know, is a body of water that is below sea level. In fact, it's 980 or 90 feet below sea level. It is the lowest freshwater body of water in the world. So it's nearly 1,000 feet below sea level, and as we know, also it's surrounded by hills, some of them very sharp ravines that protrude up from the sides, coming many times right up to the edge of the water. So it's a low body of water with sharp sides, steep inclines on the side. Now, not very far from the Sea of Galilee. If we were to travel about 30 miles north of the Sea of Galilee, we come to a place called Mount Hermon. You've heard of Mount Hermon before, as you read through your Old Testament. Mount Hermon is some 9,200 feet above sea level. So that's a difference of 10,000 feet in elevation in a very short geographical distance. And in addition to that, the sea is very low and surrounded almost like down inside a bowl. So we know the nature of many storms, many atmospheric storms, the cause of which is oftentimes, probably most often, differences in temperature, right? Differences in temperature and air pressure is what usually brings about storms, particularly violent storms. So you have a difference of 10,000 feet in elevation in a short geographical distance, and the bottom of this is like a little bowl onto a body of water. So the hotter air is right here on the Sea of Galilee. The colder air is up higher. And so the collision of those two temperatures of air is what causes many storms. And so you can just see that it's a body of water that was almost designed for tropical type storms, quickly arising storms, and violent storms. And this is exactly what happens. This great storm arises quite suddenly. The waves were breaking into the boat, literally throwing themselves against the boat. Mark is the only one who tells us that the boat was already filling with water. So the waves are coming into the water. The disciples are bailing water out. So you can just imagine, it's dark now because they set out for this 7 to 10 mile journey over water at the end of the day. So it's probably pitch dark now. The waves, the wind, the water's coming into the boat. They're bailing out as fast as they can. And I'm pretty sure that all of them probably forgot their life vest on this trip. So you can imagine the fear that's beginning to overcome them. So the waves are breaking into the boat. The boat was already filling, verse 38, but he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him and they said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" So here's Jesus, asleep in the stern, we're told, asleep on the cushion. Mark's the only one who tells us about the cushion. And he is asleep here in the stern of the boat. Now the cushion, don't think of a cushion like your nice little fluffy throw pillow on your couch at home. The cushion probably meant just the leather-covered seat that the steersman sat on in the rear of the boat. So something a little bit softer than the wood around it, but not much softer. And Jesus, we're told, is asleep on that cushion. This, by the way, is the only place in all of the Bible that we're ever told of Jesus sleeping. We're never told of Jesus sleeping in any other occasions. All the Christmas songs talk about the sleeping baby Jesus. We're never told that as Jesus as a baby was asleep. This is the only place that we're told that Jesus was asleep in the middle of such a storm. So he's asleep here on the stern, and the exhaustion must have been just extreme because he was asleep in the middle of such a storm, and they awake him. Verse 38, but he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion, and they woke him, and they said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" So notice the accusation here, the sharpness of this accusation. They believe that Jesus' sleep, his slumber, is a result of maybe his indifference, his lack of concern for them. Like he's just going to sleep and he knows maybe he'll survive, but he doesn't really care if the disciples go down with the boat or not. So they wake him. There's a stern accusation. "Teacher, are you not even concerned? Do you not even care that we're perishing?" And notice the irony of this. The irony of the accusation is this. Jesus is the one who most cared. There's never been another who cared like Jesus cared. Who cared specifically that they were perishing. John 3 and verse 16 says that for God so loved the world that the believing ones, the ones who are believing, should not perish. He sent His Son that the believing ones should not perish. He left His glory. He left His home in heaven. He took upon Himself humanity. He came to be mocked and beaten and punished and killed because He cared. There's never been one who cared like Jesus cared, yet their accusation is, "Don't you care at all?" Now, ironically, it's these very same disciples who themselves will sleep during Jesus' hour of terror. When He asks them, He pleads with them, "Will you remain awake and pray with me?" And yet they don't. During His hour of greatest need, during His hour of terror, they are the ones who sleep. And they don't sleep the sleep that Jesus is sleeping. Jesus is sleeping the sleep of trust, as we'll talk about in just a minute. He's sleeping the sleep of trust. They're sleeping the sleep of weariness and indifference and lack of concern. These very same disciples that accuse Him of not caring for them because He's asleep, they themselves will sleep when He needs them most. The irony is thick. The irony also, of course, they awaken Jesus and they say, "Jesus, don't you care that we're perishing?" It's the seamen who are awakening the carpenter here. Isn't that ironic? These are professional seamen. The ones on the boat, we're going to see throughout the account, this whole account is just replete with eyewitness details. This is Mark telling Peter's story. Peter, who's in the boat with Jesus, and all of the eyewitness details. Peter himself was a lifelong fisherman. Many of the other disciples were as well. They grew up on the Sea of Galilee. They are professional seamen. And in their professional opinion, the boat's about to go down. And what do? They awake the carpenter. Isn't that ironic? And what are they expecting Jesus to do? When they awake him, Jesus, don't you know we're about to perish? What exactly are they expecting him to do? Because what Jesus does, clearly they didn't expect that. So from their reaction, we know that what Jesus did to resolve the situation was the last thing they thought was going to happen. What were they expecting him to do? So at this point, it's proper to draw some parallels, of course, to the story that we read earlier, the story of Jonah. 2 men of God sleeping in a boat during a storm. And the parallels are quite amazing. Of course, Jonah, the man of God, who in his disobedience goes and gets into a boat and goes across the sea to escape God's plan. Jesus, the man of obedience, goes onto the sea because this is God's plan. Both instances, the man of God is on the boat during the storm. The boats are tossed about. The sea is raging. And the sea is brought to a calm as the man of disobedience is thrown overboard as a sacrifice. The sea, in Jesus' case, will be brought to a permanent calm when he also is sacrificed. But Jonah is thrown overboard as the sacrifice in order to calm the storm. This is all a result of the pagan sailors saying, get up and pray with us. That's probably what the disciples were thinking. Get up and pray with us. Maybe they're thinking his prayers could be more effective than their prayers, or the more people praying, the better. That's probably why they awoke Jesus. But they awake Jonah, the other man of God sleeping on the boat. They awake him and they say, pray to your God. They find out Jonah is the cause of this. They throw him overboard. The sea is brought to a calm. But then the man of God, Jonah, is rescued by God, but by the fish. You see, the fish in the story of Jonah is not God's judgment. The fish is God's rescue. So God rescues the prophet by means of the fish and saves him. Jesus will be sacrificed in order to calm the sea, but he won't be rescued by his Father. He will go to the cross as the sacrifice and not be rescued. And then the result of both stories, the rest of the sailors are afraid, they fear God, and they worship him. The parallels, and there's more, but the parallels between Jonah, the man of God of disobedience, and Jesus, the man of God of obedience, both asleep on a boat in a storm on the sea, and then the calming of that sea, the parallels are quite amazing. So they wake Jesus. They say to Jesus, wake up, probably thinking, wake up and pray with us, or to some effect, teacher, do you not care that we are perishing? Verse 39, and he awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm. So we just completed a section in which we were told repeatedly this theme that those on the inside are the ones who are given understanding and revelation of God. That was what the parables were all about. That's what Jesus said in verses 10, 11, 12, 13. You, those on the inside, to you has been given the secrets of the kingdom of God, but to those on the outside, I just speak in parables. So those on the inside are given the understanding. They're given the revelation. They're given the comprehension of Jesus. Yet that theme didn't stop with the parables. That theme now continues because it's those on the inside who are given the greater revelation of Jesus. Because this is what the trip is about. The storm is not about Jesus delivering them from danger, at least not primarily. The storm is about Jesus revealing himself to them. And so in the storm, those who are the called out ones, those who are the sheep of his pasture, those who are in the boat, they are given the greatest revelation of who Jesus is. So what sort of revelation are they given? First of all, the revelation that they're given is given to them in the midst of this storm. It's because of the storm that they're given this understanding. We read from Job chapter 42 and verse 5, Job, speaking of his afflictions, he said, I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. The afflictions that I have suffered have opened my eyes to who you are. Psalm 119 and verse 71, it is good for me that I was afflicted, that I might learn your statutes. So the affliction that the psalmist writes of is the means by which he gained a greater knowledge, a greater understanding of God. So Jesus stands up and he speaks this. Verse 39, he awoke, and notice how he awoke. They woke him. Verse 38, they woke him, and they said to him, teacher, do you not care that we're perishing? Then verse 39, and he awoke. So why did Mark repeat Jesus woke up. Did Jesus wake up twice? Did they wake him and he go back to sleep and then they had to wake him a second time? What this means is, this speaks to us something of the depth of Jesus' sleep. This is indeed an eyewitness account. This is the account of someone who was there watching this. Because here's what happened. Now you can relate to this because we've all been there. We've all been in that deep sleep in which we are sleeping so deeply and so soundly, and then someone or something wakes us out of that sleep. And then for about 5 or 10 seconds, you're not quite sure what your own name is. And then you're trying to figure out, well, you got to wake up because you got to go somewhere. You're just not sure if you need to get to work or you need to catch the bus to go to the 3rd grade. You know what I'm talking about. When we can relate to those 5, 10, 15 seconds when we've been awoken out of a sleep so deep that we're not quite sure who we are, where we are, or when we are. That was the first waking of Jesus. In fact, Mark uses the standard New Testament word for resurrection. They literally resurrected Jesus. Jesus was so deeply asleep, it was as though he was dead. So they shake him. Imagine what they had to do to wake Jesus, because the storm tossing the boat about, water coming into the storm, that hasn't awakened Jesus. So imagine what they have to do to wake him. They must shake him or shout to him. Literally, Mark says, resurrect him. So they wake him, they shake him. And in his grogginess, he's sort of half awake and opens one eye and says to the wind and the waves, peace and be still. But then, when he woke, meaning, after that first 10, 15 seconds, then now you remember who you are and you remember what day of the week it is and you remember what you got to do. Then Jesus fully woke up. And you see the wonderful detail that Mark gives us here. This is truly an eyewitness account. It's wonderful for me. I hope you can share this with me. It's wonderful to read the gospel accounts and just see the firsthand perspective, just see the personality of the writer of that gospel. Luke, who is the physician, his gospel is the one that most frequently gives us details about a sickness or someone's body, because a physician would notice that. Matthew, who's the tax collector, his gospel most often gives us details about finances, financial matters, and money, because that's who Matthew was. Mark's account is the account of Peter, the seaman, the fisherman, and Mark's account is the one that most often gives us details about the sea and the water and boats. And so Mark's account is the only one that tells us that there were other boats with him. It's the only account that tells us what time they left. It's the only account that tells us that the waves were coming inside. It's the only account that tells us what they had to do to wake Jesus up. This was Peter watching. Maybe Peter was the one shaking him. And so Jesus comes fully awake, and then he speaks these words, peace, be still. Now, the word peace is not the word shalom, which is a peace, a well-being peace, a contented peace. That's not shalom. Instead, this is a word that just literally means be quiet, shut up, peace, be still. Now, that word be still, we've seen that before. We saw that back in chapter 1 as Jesus spoke that same word to the demon-possessed man in the synagogue who began to speak, I know who you are. And remember, Jesus said to him, be ye muzzled. Same word here, be muzzled. And Jesus speaks it in a very rare sort of form. It's the perfect passive imperative, which basically means it's a completed action in the past. Passive means it's being acted upon you, but it's an imperative, it's a command. So literally, Jesus says, be ye muzzled and stay that way. Be quiet and stay quiet. Shut up and remain shut up. So he wakes up out of this, groggy as he is, speaks to the wind and the waves, shut up and stay quiet. And all of this is doing for the disciples a tremendous revelation. So let's think about what was revealed to the disciples in this storm. First of all, what was revealed to them was his perfect humanity. His perfect humanity. Is there anything more human than to be as exhausted and as tired and deeply asleep as was Jesus? Is there anything more human than to be that deeply asleep. And this is certainly a sleep of exhaustion, because Jesus has taught and preached all day. I personally know of nothing more draining and more exhausting than to preach God's Word. It's physically draining, it's mentally draining, it's emotionally draining, and most of all, it's spiritually draining. Jesus has done that all day. He is spent and He's so exhausted that He literally sleeps so deeply that Mark uses the word resurrect, almost like they're bringing Him back from a sleep that's comatose. Is there anything more human than that? But Jesus is not just human. This isn't just a revelation that Jesus is human. This is a revelation that Jesus is the perfect human. Because you see, this isn't just the sleep of exhaustion. Jesus knew what was coming. This is the sleep of perfect trust in His Father. Perfect, complete trust. There is not a single ounce of a chance that God is going to let Jesus drown in the Sea of Galilee. And Jesus knows that. And so He can know that this storm is coming. He knows this will be the storm of the decade. And yet He can say, this looks like a good time for a nap. And He can sleep the sleep of trust, perfectly trusting in His Father. Isaiah 26 and verse 3, you keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on you because he trusts in you. Psalm 4 and verse 8, in peace I will both lie down and sleep, for you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety. Jesus is the perfect human, perfectly trusting in His Father. But Jesus is not just the perfect human, but also what's revealed to them is the extreme clarity of His deity. Can you imagine in front of your followers standing up and speaking to wind and waves and water and issuing forth a command in full expectation that the wind will obey you? You know, Jesus could have prayed a little silent prayer to His Father. Father, calm this storm for them, Father. Make this storm cease right now, Father. He could have done that, and the Father would have done it. But instead, He makes a show of it, standing up, issuing forth this bold command, this brash command, as if to say, look at me, I made the wind and the waves. I sustain the wind and the waves. And just as my sheep hear my voice and recognize my voice, so does the creation recognize my voice. They recognize their Maker and they obey their Maker. Watch this. The clarity of Jesus' deity is on full display. Something that I don't need to convince you from the Scriptures of this morning that you know full well is that man has no control over the wind. I don't need to show you that from the Scriptures, though the Scriptures teach us that. Ecclesiastes 8 verse 8. No man can retain the wind. Or John chapter 3 and verse 1. The wind blows where it will. The wind goes where it pleases. You can't control it. So we know that instinctively. We don't control the wind. How futile of us to assume that we have any control whatsoever over something like the wind. Yet the deity of the Maker, the one who created all things. Through Him were all things made. For Him were all things made. By Him all things exist and are sustained. The creation knows the voice of its Maker. It knows the voice of its Master, and it obeys immediately. Notice the immediacy. There was a great calm. That word great, we recognize it, mega. So there was a mega storm, a megale, a mega storm, and now there's a mega calm. It's the second great. Now that mega calm was instantaneous. The wind immediately ceased. But also, something else immediately ceased. The waves. Do you know that even if a storm by natural means immediately stops, if the wind immediately stops blowing, do you know that the energy in the waves doesn't immediately stop? That energy will work itself out for a time after that. Yet not in this case. Immediately it was calm. The voice of the Maker, the clarity of Jesus' deity. I know of no other passage in all of Scripture that the humanity of Jesus is squished up beside the deity of Jesus so closely as this. One who is so exhausted, so spent, that he can sleep through a storm with water splashing over him. Yet when he is awakened from that sleep, he will speak to the wind and the waves, and they immediately obey him. I know of nothing that displays both the humanity of Jesus and the deity of Jesus, both so plainly to such extremes right here together. So this revelation that they're given to him, this is what the storm is primarily doing for them. This is why Jesus took them across, because the called out ones, those whom he has called unto himself, those on the inside, they are given the greater understanding. That's what the parable of the measures taught us. The one who has, to him more will be given. And this is the acting out of the one who has, to him more will be given. Those in the boat all have understanding of Jesus. Yet to the ones who have, more is being given. But notice that more is only given in the context of the boat and the storm. And that's what's happening for the disciples.